If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first saw Julian Henderson leaning against his father's gleaming convertible, that he would one day become the axis my entire world tilted on, I would have laughed. Not a kind laugh, either. It would have been the bitter, hollow sound of a man who knew his place. And his place was in the shadows, covered in grease and sawdust, while boys like Julian lived in the sun. He was always just out of reach. An idea more than a person. He was Sam's older brother, the one who'd escaped our small coastal town for a big city and a life I couldn't even properly imagine. I was Sam's best friend, the quiet one, the one who fixed things. I fixed their lawnmower, their leaky faucets, and eventually, I became the custodian of their father's greatest love, the Serenity, a 30-foot wooden sloop that was more memory than boat. My life was a loop of quiet routines. Wake at dawn, the air thick with salt and the cry of gulls. A quick coffee, black and bitter, standing at the window of my small apartment above the marina. Then down to the workshop, a cavernous space that smelled of varnish, cedar, and the sea. I was good with my hands. They could take splintered, forgotten wood and make it whole again. They could diagnose an engine's ailment by sound alone. My hands knew a language my mouth had never learned to speak. Solitude was my trade. It was the air I breathed. I observed the world from a safe distance, from behind a buffer of polite nods and necessary, work-related conversations. I knew the tides, the moods of the weather, the secrets of wood grain. People were a more complicated material, one I had long ago decided I was not equipped to handle. And then there was Julian. He'd appear for holidays, a fleeting mirage of effortless confidence. He was taller than I remembered each time, broader in the shoulders. He carried the city on him like a second skin, in the cut of his clothes, the easy cadence of his speech, the way he held a glass of wine at his parents' summer barbecues. He was a force of nature, drawing all the light in the room, while I was a fixture, as unnoticed and as necessary as the old dock pilings. I watched him from across the lawn, my hands shoved in my pockets, a bottle of beer slick with condensation. He'd be laughing, a deep, rumbling sound that made something in my chest ache. He never looked my way. Why would he? I was just Leo, the boat guy, Sam's quiet friend, a piece of the local scenery. The distance between us wasn't just the expanse of his parents' manicured lawn. It was a chasm of experience, of class, of a fundamental difference in how we move through the world. He strode. I slipped by unnoticed. He spoke. I listened. He was, to my secret and desperate heart, everything. And he was, as far as I knew, completely, utterly straight. That was the highest, most insurmountable wall of all. It was a fact I had accepted like I accepted the rising of the sun. A painful, unchangeable truth. My feelings for him were a ship in a bottle, meticulously built inside the fragile glass of my own isolation. A thing to be looked at, marveled at in private, but never, ever touched. The disruption came on a Tuesday in early June. The sky was a searing, cloudless blue. I was in the Hendersons' boathouse, sanding the hull of the Serenity, the rhythmic rasp of the paper against the wood a familiar comfort. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a frantic staccato against my thigh. It was Sam. His voice was thin, stretched taut with panic. Mr. Henderson had had a heart attack. The world tilted on its axis, but this time it was a sickening, violent lurch. The sanding block fell from my hand, clattering on the dusty floorboards. The weeks that followed were a blur of hushed phone calls and a heavy, waiting silence. Mr. Henderson was stable, recovering, but the doctors were firm. No stress, no strenuous activity, and absolutely, under no circumstances, was he to go near the boat restoration that had been his life's passion. That was when the second call came. This time it was Mr. Henderson himself, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its usual booming authority. He wanted the Serenity finished. He wanted it in the water by the end of summer, a goal we had set together months ago. It was, he said, the only thing that would make him feel like he was getting better. Of course, I said yes. How could I say no? There's one condition, he'd said, a touch of his old stubbornness returning. Julian's home for the summer to help out. He's got nothing to do but pace around the house, driving his mother mad. I want him to help you. Keep him busy. Teach him something useful. My heart stopped, to stop dead in my chest. A block of ice in a suddenly silent cavern. Julian, helping me. Forced proximity. The two most terrifying words in my vocabulary. For years, I had curated our distance, maintained the careful space that kept my secrets safe. Now, that space was about to collapse. We would be in this boathouse, a small enclosed world of wood shavings and the scent of turpentine, for hours a day. Together. The first day was agony. I arrived early, my stomach a knot of writhing snakes. I organized my tools, laying them out in neat, obsessive rows as if their order could somehow impose order on the chaos churning inside me. I needed this space to be mine, a fortress of my own competence, before he arrived and contaminated it with his presence. He came in just after 9, ducking his head to clear the low doorway. He filled the space instantly. The boathouse, which had always felt spacious and solitary, suddenly seemed small, cramped, and charged with an impossible energy. He was wearing an old t-shirt and faded jeans, clothes I'd never seen him in. They clung to a physique that his city clothes had only hinted at. "Leo," he said. His voice was deeper in the enclosed space, a low rumble that vibrated through the wooden floor. "Julian," I managed my own voice a dry rasp. He looked around, a flicker of something, discomfort, boredom, in his eyes. He seemed like a caged animal, a creature of open spaces forced into a cage. My cage. "So, Dad said you'd put me to work," he said, jamming his hands into his pockets. It was a posture I recognized, a defensive stance. He was as uncomfortable as I was. That thought was a small, cold comfort. The first few days were a dance of excruciating awkwardness. I gave him simple tasks: sanding, sweeping, organizing supplies. I tried to keep a physical distance between us, using the long hull of the boat as a natural barrier. I spoke only when necessary, my instructions clipped and professional. I was the expert here. That was my armor, but it was impossible not to watch him. From my perch on the scaffolding, I observed. I saw the way the muscles in his back and shoulders coiled and released as he sanded a piece of mahogany, his movements initially clumsy but gradually finding a rhythm. I saw the tiny beads of sweat that gathered at his temples, catching the light that filtered through the grimy windows. I started to notice details I'd never seen from across a lawn. A faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way he'd bite his lower lip when he was concentrating, a gesture of such unguarded focus it made my breath catch. His hands. They were large, capable, but lacked the ingrained knowledge of my own. They were the hands of someone who worked with ideas, not materials. But there was a surprising gentleness in them as he learned to handle the delicate wood. He was quiet, too. The easy, charming conversationalist from the barbecues was gone. In his place was a man who seemed burdened, his confident facade showing cracks I'd never imagined were there. I saw the weariness in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking, a deep, profound exhaustion that had nothing to do with sanding wood. He was worried about his father. The realization humanized him in a way that was both terrifying and deeply compelling. The fortress I had built around my heart began to develop hairline fractures. The first touch happened a week in. I was trying to secure a new plank to the transom, balancing precariously on a ladder, my hands full. I needed a C-clamp, one that had rolled just out of my reach on the workbench below. "Julian," I said, the name feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. "Could you pass me that clamp?" He moved without a word, picking it up. He reached up to me, his arm extended. And as I took it, my fingers brushed against his. It was nothing. A fleeting, accidental contact. Skin on skin for less than a second. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A searing, white-hot jolt that shot up my arm and exploded in my chest. My heart, a frantic bird, slammed against the cage of my ribs. Heat flooded my face. I'm sure I turned a shade of crimson that would have matched the mahogany stain on my hands. I fumbled the clamp, its metal jaws clanging against the ladder rung. "Whoa, careful," he said, his voice steady. He reached up, his other hand instinctively going to my arm to steady me. His grip was firm, warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. a five-fingered brand burning into my skin. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. My mind was a siren, screaming. He knows. He felt it. He knows you're a freak. I pulled my arm away as if I'd been burned, turning my face away so he couldn't see the wild terror in my eyes. Thanks, I muttered, my voice tight and strangled. I focused on the plank, on the clamp, on the turn of the screw. My hands were shaking. I could feel his gaze on my back, a tangible pressure. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with everything I couldn't say. Did he notice? Did he feel anything? Or was it just me, my overactive imagination, my pathetic, secret longing turning a meaningless touch into a cataclysmic event? When I finally dared to look down, he was back at his own task, his shoulders set in a stiff line. He hadn't said a word. The air between us had changed. It was no longer just awkward. It was charged, tense, a wire-pulled taut, humming with a frequency only I could hear. Or so I thought. The dynamic between us began to shift after that. It was subtle, a slow, tectonic movement. He started asking questions, not just about the boat, but about me. How did you learn to do all this? He asked one afternoon, his voice quiet. My dad, I said, not looking up from a joint I was carving. He had a workshop. Taught me. Is he still around? A pang of the old, familiar grief. No, he passed away a few years ago. I'm sorry, Julian said, and it sounded genuine. Not the polite, reflexive phrase people usually offered. He was quiet for a moment. My dad, he tried to teach me and Sam this stuff. Sam picked it up. I was always clumsy, impatient. I think he was disappointed. It was the first crack in his armor. The first real moment of vulnerability. The son who lived in the sun had his own shadows. He wasn't the golden boy. Not really. He was just a man who felt he'd disappointed his father. It was a feeling I knew all too well, though for different reasons. Something in me softened. The fear receded, just a little, replaced by a tentative flicker of empathy. A few days later, he was struggling. He was trying to varnish the inside of a small, awkward cabinet, his large frame contorted in the tight space. I heard a muttered curse, then a louder one. This is impossible, he growled, his voice muffled. He backed out of the space, a streak of sticky varnish in his hair and a look of pure, unadulterated frustration on his face. He looked at me, his usual confidence completely gone. How do you do it? For the first time, he was asking for my help. Not as a boss's son, but as a student, a novice. The power dynamic, for a moment, was completely inverted. I was the one with the knowledge, the skill. I was the one in control. I took the brush from his hand. Our fingers didn't touch this time, but the space between them felt electric. You're holding the brush too tight, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. And you're trying to force it. You have to let the brush do the work. Follow the grain. Like this, I leaned into the cabinet, my shoulder brushing against his. I ignored the jolt, forcing myself to focus on the task. I laid down a smooth, even stroke of varnish, the bristles whispering against the wood. I could feel him watching me, his breath warm on my neck. He was so close. Too close. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat in the quiet boathouse. You make it look easy, he murmured, his voice low and right beside my ear. A shiver traced its way down my spine. It's not easy, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's just practice. I pulled back, handing him the brush. You try. He took it. And this time, when our fingers brushed, he didn't pull away. His gaze met mine, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not pity, not boredom. Something else. Something questioning. Something interested. The playing field was leveling. The chasm between us was shrinking. And that was the most terrifying, most hopeful thing in the world. The storm had been threatening all day. The sky had turned a bruised, greenish purple, and the air was thick and heavy, charged with a static that made the hairs on my arms stand up. We'd been working in a companionable silence, the tension from the past few weeks having settled into a more comfortable rhythm. We had found a way to exist in the same small space. The first clap of thunder was a distant growl. The second was a cannon shot directly overhead, shaking the boathouse to its foundations. Then the rain came, not a drizzle, but but a solid, roaring wall of water that hammered against the tin roof, drowning out all other sound. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a sudden, disorienting darkness. Damn. Julian's voice came out of the blackness, startlingly close. My heart was pounding, a frantic echo of the thunder outside. The intimate setting, a private, isolated, dimly lit location. My mind was screaming warnings. Stay there, I said, my voice tight. There's a lantern in the supply closet. I navigated the familiar space by memory, my hands finding the cool metal of the closet door. I fumbled for the lantern and the matches, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick. The match scraped, flared, and I lit the wick. A soft, golden glow pushed back the oppressive darkness, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. When I turned, Julian was standing just a few feet away. His face was half in shadow, his eyes catching the flickering light. He looked different. Stripped of the daylight, of the context of our work, he was just a man in a small room, watching me. The rain on the roof was a relentless drumming, isolating us from the rest of the world. We were on an island, just the two of us. Guess we're stuck here for a while, he said, his voice quiet. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I set the lantern on the workbench between us. The lights softened the hard edges of the tools, the sharp lines of the boat, turning our workshop into something else entirely. Something intimate. We sat on opposite sides of the bench, the lantern our small son. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy with unspoken things. He was the one who broke it. I haven't been honest with you, he said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flame. About why I came home. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. It wasn't just because of my dad's heart attack. I mean, that was the catalyst, but I was already planning on leaving the city. I got fired. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Fired. Me. The golden boy. My big, important finance job. It was all a house of cards. I hated it. I was miserable. And I wasn't even good at it. He finally looked at me, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes was a punch to the gut. The confident facade was gone, completely stripped away. I came home because I had nowhere else to go, he said, his voice thick with a shame that felt achingly familiar. I've been pretending. Pretending for my parents, for Sam, pretending for you. Acting like I'm just here to help, when really I'm just hiding. My carefully constructed defenses crumbled to dust. This wasn't Julian Henderson, the untouchable object of my affection. This was just Julian, a man who was lost and hurting and felt like a failure. You're not just hiding, I heard myself say, the words coming out before I could stop them. You're a good son. You came home when your family needed you. You're here, every day, doing work you don't know how to do because your dad asked you to. That's not nothing. He stared at me, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. You're always so quiet, he said, his voice soft. I can never tell what you're thinking. The question hung in the air between us, a direct challenge to the silence I had hidden behind for my entire life. And in the dark, with the storm raging outside, something inside me broke. The fear, the longing, the years of suppressed hope, it all came rushing to the surface. I think, I started, my voice trembling, that I've been waiting for you to see me for a very long time, the confession. It was out, a fragile, terrifying thing laid bare on the workbench between us. The air crackled. The world narrowed to the space between his eyes and mine. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his gaze intense, searching. Then, slowly, he pushed himself off his stool. He rounded the workbench, each step a hammer blow against my heart. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was so much taller than me. He blocked out the rest of the world. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently touched my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a wildfire racing through my veins. It wasn't an accident this time. It was a question. My eyes fluttered shut. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow, hesitant, unspeakably gentle. It was a kiss of discovery, of questions being asked and answered without words. His lips were soft, warm, and they tasted faintly of the coffee he'd had hours ago. It was a kiss that spoke of loneliness, of a shared sense of being lost, of a fragile hope blooming in the dark. I brought my own trembling hand up, my fingers tangling in the soft fabric of his t-shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just been completely, irrevocably shattered and remade. When he pulled back, the sound of the rain was still a roar, but the storm inside me had gone quiet. We just stood there, his hand still on my face, our breath mingling in the lantern light. Nothing would ever be the same. I woke to the sound of bird song and the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. For a moment, I was disoriented. The light filtering through the boathouse windows was the pale, gray light of early morning. The storm had passed. Then memory came rushing back in a tidal wave. The rain, the confession, the kiss. My eyes flew open. I was on the small cot I sometimes used in the back of the workshop, a rough wool blanket thrown over me. And I was alone. The boathouse was silent and empty. The lantern was extinguished on the workbench. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach, heavy and sickening. He was gone. I sat up, my heart starting a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. The air was cool and damp, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the lingering, phantom smell of his skin. It was a mistake. The thought slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Of course it was a mistake. He was vulnerable, lonely, confused. I was convenient, a port in a storm. But the storm had passed, and he had sailed on, leaving me wrecked on the shore. The anxiety began to spiral, a venomous serpent coiling in my gut. I replayed every moment, every word, every touch, searching for the signs I must have missed. The hesitation in his kiss. Was it uncertainty or regret? The quiet way he'd held me afterwards. Was it comfort, or was he just biding his time until he could escape? My own foolishness was a bitter taste in my mouth. Years of carefully guarded silence, shattered for a moment of impossible hope. And for what? For this. This hollow, echoing silence. This crushing certainty that I had overstepped, misread everything, and ruined the fragile truce we had built. I dressed mechanically, my movements stiff and clumsy. My body felt alien, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. It felt like a brand of my own shame. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, to breathe air that wasn't saturated with the memory of him. I walked out of the boathouse and into the clean-washed morning. The world seemed too bright, too loud. I went back to my apartment, the silence there even more profound. My solitude, once a comfort, was now a punishment. It was a mirror reflecting my own stupidity. I sent him a text, a single, cowardly sentence. Left my keys at the boathouse. Let me know when you'll be there today. It was a lie. My keys were in my pocket, but it was a test, a desperate plea for a response, for any sign that I hadn't just imagined the entire night. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky. My phone remained silent. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Each tick of the clock was a mockery. He wasn't coming. He wasn't going to answer. He was avoiding me. He regretted it. He was disgusted. He was probably laughing about it with his brother Sam. You'll never guess what the quiet boat guy did. The self-recrimination was a vicious cycle. I was an idiot, a fool for thinking someone like Julian Henderson could ever want someone like me. I had taken his moment of vulnerability and twisted it into something it wasn't. I had projected my own pathetic fantasies onto him. The day bled into a long, agonizing afternoon. I didn't go back to the boathouse. I couldn't. It had been transformed from my sanctuary into the scene of my greatest humiliation, the place where my ship in a bottle had finally, inevitably shattered. A second day passed in the same silent torment. No text, no call. The absence of him was a gaping wound. My old life, the one I had before he'd stumbled into my small, ordered world, was gone. But the new one, the one I had dared to imagine for a few short hours, had been a mirage. I was left in a desolate, empty space in between. I had to face it. I had to go back to work. I would be professional. I would pretend last night never happened. I would rebuild my walls stronger and higher this time. I would finish the serenity, and then I would never have to see Julian Henderson again. The thought was both a relief and a kind of death. On the morning of the third day, I was standing in my small kitchen, nursing a cold cup of coffee, staring out at the water, when there was a knock at my door. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. The knock came again, firmer this time. My legs felt like lead as I moved to the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what? An apology? An awkward explanation? A final, definitive rejection? I opened the door. It was him. He looked terrible. His hair was a mess. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd had on 2 days ago. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked wrecked. He just stood there for a moment, his gaze searching mine. All the witty, sarcastic things I had prepared, all the cool, professional dismissals, they all dissolved on my tongue. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped back, holding the door open, my mind a complete blank. He walked into my small living room, and once again seemed to fill the entire space, his presence overwhelming. He turned to face me, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I'm sorry," he said, the words a low rush. "Leo, God, I'm so sorry. For just disappearing. For not calling. That was a coward's move, and I'm sorry." I just stared, unable to process his words. He took a ragged breath. "I freaked out," he said, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "After the storm, I woke up, and you were asleep, and it was all so real. And it terrified me. I've never felt that way before. About anyone. And definitely not about a guy." He started pacing the small room, his movements agitated. "My whole life, I've had the script, you know? The one everyone expected me to follow. The right school, the right job, the right girlfriend. And it all fell apart. And then there was you. And nothing in the script prepared me for you." He stopped, running a hand through his already messy hair. "So I ran. It's what I do. I ran from my job, and I ran from you. I went back to the house, and I just hid. I thought if I ignored it, the feeling would go away, that I could just put it back in a box and pretend it never happened." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate sincerity. "But it didn't go away. It just got worse. The silence was deafening. All I could think about was you. About how it felt to kiss you. About the look in your eyes right before I did. And I realized that running away from this was the stupidest, most cowardly thing I've ever done in my life." He took a step closer to me. "I don't know what this is, Leo. It's new, and it's terrifying, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But I know that I don't want to run from it anymore. I don't want to run from you." The dam inside me broke. All the fear, the anxiety, the crushing weight of the last 2 days, it all washed away, replaced by a wave of dizzying, unbelievable relief. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I thought I was a mistake." "No," he said, his voice fierce. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to cup my face, just as they had in the boathouse. "No, you are the only thing that has felt real in a very, very long time." He kissed me again. And this time, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of apology, of reassurance, of a firm and unwavering choice. It was the beginning of a conversation, a promise that we would figure this out together. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "So," he said, a small, shaky smile playing on his lips. "What happens now?" "I don't know," I admitted, my own smile feeling fragile and new. "I guess we keep working on the boat." He laughed, a real, deep laugh that vibrated through my entire body. "Okay, I can do that." The next day, he showed up at the boathouse not with his work clothes, but with a cardboard box in his arms. It was filled with a random assortment of his belongings, a few books, a laptop, a framed photo of him and Sam as kids. "My room at my parents' house is suffocating," he said, by way of explanation. "Your couch looks a lot more comfortable." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He was staying. It was a tangible act, a gesture that spoke louder than any words. He wasn't just committing to figuring out his feelings. He was committing to my space. To me. He was moving his life, bit by bit, into the small orbit of my own. I took the box from him, its weight a comforting, solid thing in my arms. "The couch is terrible," I said, a smile pulling at my lips. You'll hate it. I'll take my chances, he said, his eyes warm and full of a promise that made my heart feel impossibly full. He wasn't running again. Our new beginning wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was a series of small, quiet scenes that felt more profound than any sweeping declaration. It was making coffee in my tiny kitchen the next morning, bumping elbows in the small space, a comfortable, domestic dance we were learning the steps to. It was the way he'd hand me a tool in the boathouse, his fingers intentionally brushing mine, the touch no longer a source of panic but a small, private current that flowed between us. It was sharing a cheap pizza on the floor of my apartment, our legs tangled together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about the crushing pressure of his old job, the hollowness of his city life. I told him about my father, about my love for the quiet language of wood and engines, about the loneliness I had worn like a coat for so long. It was waking up in the middle of the night, not from anxiety, but from the warmth of his body next to mine in my too small bed. He'd kicked the lumpy couch to the curb after one night. He'd thrown an arm over me in his sleep, holding me close, and the feeling of his steady breathing against my back was the most comforting sound I had ever known. The morning after anxiety was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. We finished the Serenity in the last week of August. She was beautiful, her mahogany hull gleaming, her sails a crisp, brilliant white. Mr. Henderson, looking healthier and happier than he had in months, was there for the launch. He clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. Then he looked at Julian, who was standing beside me, our shoulders pressed together. He looked between the two of us, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, a silent, simple acceptance that meant more than anything. As the Serenity slipped into the water, her bow cutting cleanly through the waves, Julian's hand found mine. He laced his fingers through my own, his grip firm and sure, right there on the dock, in the bright, unforgiving light of day. It was a public declaration, a defiance of the script he had been trying to follow his whole life. He was writing a new one. We were writing it together. I look back on that summer now, on the man I was. The quiet observer, the solitary craftsman, hiding in his workshop, convinced that love was a language he would never learn to speak. I had built my life like I built my boats, sturdy, solitary, and sealed against the storms of the world. Julian wasn't a storm. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the unexpected tide that breached my defenses, not with force, but with a quiet, persistent vulnerability that called to my own. He didn't just disrupt my routine. He dismantled the lonely world I had so carefully constructed and helped me build a new one, a shared one. Sometimes in the early morning, I'll wake up to the smell of coffee already brewing. I'll find him in the kitchen, his back to me, silhouetted against the dawn light breaking over the marina. And in that quiet, domestic moment, I'll feel a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost brings me to my knees. He is my harbor. He is the place my solitary ship finally came home to rest. My life is no longer a ship in a bottle. It's a vessel on the open water, and for the first time, I'm not afraid of where the current will take me, as long as he is by my side.